Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're embarking on a really fascinating investigative journey. Across human history and spanning almost every major civilization, we share this absolutely enduring fascination with giants. Stories of massive, superhuman beings walking the earth are just deeply embedded in our collective consciousness. But where exactly do these stories come from? Are they some kind of suppressed physical history, or maybe a rich symbolic mythology? Well, today we're going to separate historical fact from religious tradition and untangle those speculative internet theories from actual documented academic research. Let's dive right in.
Now, if you spend any time scrolling through social media, there's a very good chance you've seen a viral headline looking exactly like this one. Smithsonian admits to destruction of thousands of giant human skeletons in early 1900s. It's some pretty captivating hook, right? The claim usually goes on to state that the United States Supreme Court forced the Smithsonian Institution to release classified papers detailing this massive cover-up, all to protect the mainstream chronology of human evolution. Honestly, it sounds like the plot of a summer blockbuster thriller. But let's take a step back and look at the actual documented evidence.
And this perfectly illustrates the stark difference between a wild internet rumor and a documented fact. Because when the Associated Press thoroughly investigated this claim, what they found was that there are absolutely no legitimate news reports or Supreme Court records regarding this case. None. The entire story originated back in 2014 from a satirical website called the World News Daily Report, a site whose very logo includes the phrase, "where facts don't matter." So this idea that physical archaeological evidence for giant human skeletons is being covered up by modern institutions, it's entirely rooted in internet hoaxes and, in some cases, literally just Photoshop contests.
So that brings us to a pretty crucial question. If we aren't actually finding massive physical skeletons buried out in the dirt, where on earth did the concept of these ancient giants come from, and why did ancient people spend so much time writing about them? To answer this, we need to pivot our narrative away from modern internet hoaxes and step back thousands of years to the true and honestly far more fascinating historical mystery.
Section 1. The Biblical Enigma.
To really understand this Nephilim narrative, we've got to look at the religious traditions and biblical references that have sparked centuries of intense debate. What's super interesting about this specific passage from Genesis 6, which is set right before the account of the Great Flood, is just how brief and ambiguous the foundational text actually is. It links the Nephilim to an episode involving the sons of God and the daughters of men. But notice what it doesn't do. It doesn't give us exact heights, biological details, or explicit origins. It just calls them the mighty men that were of old. And this singular, enigmatic passage has been the subject of extensive theological and academic debate ever since.
Now, the linguistic history here is absolutely crucial. The term Nephilim comes from the Hebrew root NPL, which literally translates to fall. So originally, this likely meant fallen ones, or those who cause others to fall, heavily implying violence or social oppression. But as the text was later translated into Greek for the Septuagint, translators chose the word gigantes. Think about how a single word choice changes history. That specific translation profoundly shaped our modern concept, turning a phrase that likely meant fallen warriors into the literal physical giants of popular mythology.
Section 2. Unearthing the Lost Texts.
So, ancient writers during the Second Temple period, they didn't just accept that brief kind of ambiguous Genesis narrative we just looked at. No way. They vastly expanded upon it, creating entire mythologies to fill in the gaps. For centuries, a lot of these expansive texts were considered completely lost to Western scholars. But everything changed in 1947 with the landmark discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Qumran caves. This discovery was absolutely monumental. It unlocked access to fragmentary Aramaic copies of texts like the Book of Enoch, specifically the Book of Watchers, and the Book of Giants. And these scrolls proved that an incredibly complex mythology surrounding the Nephilim was actively circulating and highly valued by ancient Jewish sects way before the 1st century.
And these ancient texts introduced a whole new set of characters, the Watchers. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers are this rebel sect of angels. Led by figures like Samyaza, they deliberately descended to Earth, violated the strict boundaries of God's creation, and mated with human women. According to this tradition, the offspring of this illicit union were the Nephilim. The Watchers are really framed as the instigators of a massive moral and physical corruption of humanity, a corruption so severe that it ultimately necessitated the cleansing of the Great Flood.
Section 3. Agents of Chaos and Monster Theory. All right. We've looked at the religious narrative. Now, we're going to step back from a literal reading of these events and apply a really fascinating symbolic academic framework. It's used by scholars to understand why these texts were written in the first place.
According to monster theory, monsters in literature are never just scary creatures for the sake of being scary. They serve a very specific societal purpose. They straddle this weird line between the familiar and the uncanny. Scholars argue that the authors of the Book of Enoch use the Watchers and the Nephilim as literary devices. They are symbols representing a terrifying blurring of divine and earthly boundaries. They are essentially agents of chaos used to mark identity and highlight deep communal anxieties about outsiders.
And the texts actually go into fascinating detail about how this chaos was introduced, because the Watchers didn't just breed giants. They acted as dark Prometheus figures. They taught humanity metallurgy to forge weapons of war, along with sorcery, root cuttings, and even cosmetology and astronomy. They brought this advanced, forbidden knowledge that completely corrupted the natural order of things.
So what does this actually mean in a real historical context? Well, the Book of Enoch was composed during a highly turbulent time when the Hebrew community was facing severe oppression from Hellenistic and Babylonian empires. Scholars argue that the Watchers symbolically represent these foreign invaders. The forbidden knowledge they bring, that represents the very real threat of foreign cultural assimilation. Adopting the weapons, vanity, and magic of the Greeks and Babylonians. Consequently, the giant Nephilim represent the resulting cultural chaos, the violence, and the ultimate destruction of the community's identity.
This whole concept of order versus chaos is vividly illustrated in a section of Enoch known as the Book of Dreams. Here, the author uses animal metaphors. The divine natural order is represented by familiar domestic animals. Cows and sheep stand in for humanity. But when the Watchers violate that order, the text describes the resulting Nephilim as elephants, camels, and donkeys. Now, to the ancient readers, these weren't just big animals. They were unnatural, uncanny beasts born of mixing things that should absolutely never be mixed. It's a profound metaphor for the destruction of the natural and social order.
Section 4. History, myth, or metaphor.
So, how should we ultimately view these ancient accounts of giants? I mean, they pop up not just in the Middle East, but literally across civilizations worldwide. Well, the academic consensus suggests these Enochic texts weren't meant to be a suppressed, physical history of biological giants. Rather, they served as a polemic manifesto. They were powerful, symbolic warnings to the ancient Jewish community. The message was super clear. Do not intermingle with oppressive empires, do not adopt their forbidden practices, and maintain your righteous identity in the face of overwhelming cultural chaos. Basically, they used mythology as a tool for survival.
And that leaves us with a final, really provocative thought to take away from this explainer today. If we stop digging in the dirt for giant bones that just aren't there, and instead look at the texts themselves, what do these giant myths reveal about us? Well, they show us that humans have always used the concept of monsters as mirrors. These ancient giants reflect humanity's enduring struggle to define our identity, to make sense of the threats around us, and to somehow maintain order in a chaotic, unknown world. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most profound truths in our history are found not in the literal facts, but in the metaphors we create to survive them. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the unknown.